This is about defending democracy. This is no longer Democrats versus Republicans. What do you want your kids to believe in? There must be give and take.
This is White Flag with Joe Walsh.
What would you do if you were Israel, knowing what Israel knows right now? What would you do? Answer that question. Over 1,400 of your civilians, men, women, and children, were brutally raped, tortured, butchered, killed, and kidnapped. You know who did it. It was a surprise attack. The terrorist organization that did it is the ruling government of one of your neighbors. And they took, now the number is almost 200 of your civilians hostages. You have to respond. Don't you? You have to respond. What do? Okay, you respond. What you know is this. You know that the ruling government, the terrorist organization that attacked you, is a terrorist organization, and they have no value for life. They don't think or believe like you and I do. They don't care about men, women, and children. They don't care about butchering, raping, and killing children. They don't care about Israeli lives, and they don't care about their own lives. This organization that attacked you for 17 years has ruled Gaza, and after 17 years, they've embedded their terrorist infrastructure right along with their civilian infrastructure. So their civilian infrastructure and their terrorist infrastructure is now one and the same. For 17 years, they've used their civilians as human shields. They don't care. Hamas doesn't. They don't care if Palestinians in Gaza die. In fact, well, they do care. They want Palestinians in Gaza to die. It's their strategy. It's a key part of their war strategy, because when Palestinian civilians in Gaza die, they know the world will react with sympathy. So their civilian, purposely, their civilian and their terrorist infrastructure is one and the same. What would you do? You're Israel. You know this. You have to respond. What would you do if you were Israel? And don't just take shots at Israel. Tell me, what would you do? I asked that question over the weekend, a couple times over the weekend. A bunch of people responded. But you know what? Very few people, very, very, very few people answered the question. What would you do knowing all of this? You have to respond. You must respond if you're Israel. These are the facts on the ground. You know the deal. The civilian infrastructure and the terrorist infrastructure in Gaza are one and the same. Gaza will use their civilians as human shields. They've kidnapped 200 of your people. They're holding your people. They don't care if their people die. What would you do? You know what? Hardly anybody answered that question. Virtually everybody took a shot at Israel. Virtually everybody said, oh, I wouldn't be in this position. Virtually everybody said, well, you got to get rid of Hamas, but you can't kill Palestinian civilians, blah, 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 blah. Virtually everybody either ignored the question, took a shot at Israel, or acknowledged just how damn difficult the task in front of Israel is. But very, 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 very few people answered my question. What would you do? And I guess that's an answer. I guess that's people around the world, here in America and around the world, acknowledging that once again, Israel has an almost impossible task in front of it. Over 1,400 of its civilians were butchered. Israel has to respond. Israel knows the rest of the world is going to jump on her no matter how she responds. Hamas has basically turned Gaza into a booby trap, so everything Israel does in Gaza will kill civilians because that's what Hamas wants. So what is Israel to do? Well, they have to respond. You know, it's interesting. The polling has all shown pretty consistently over the years, especially recent years, that about half of the Palestinians in Gaza support Hamas. Actually, a larger percentage of Palestinians in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, support Hamas. But the polls have pretty consistently shown that half the civilians, roughly half, support Hamas. You know that it's in Hamas's official ruling government charter documents that Israel must be destroyed. The mission, the charter of Hamas is the destruction of Israel. Hamas does not believe Israel has a right to exist. So about half of the Palestinians in Gaza feel that way. But that means half the Palestinians in Gaza, the polling shows, do believe Israel has a right to exist. Half the Palestinians in Gaza don't want anything to do with Hamas. And you're Israel. And you have to respond. I think Israel's made clear that they're going to take out Hamas. This is different. They're going to do their damn best to make sure Hamas has nothing to do with running things in Gaza. That would be better for Israel. That would be better for the region, and that would be better for the Palestinian people in Gaza. So that's Israel's objective, and Israel will do what Israel's always done, be as judicious and as careful as they can be, achieving that objective at long last, minimizing civilian casualties, which is a big part of why Israel has embarked upon this bombing campaign, unlike any bombing campaign they've done before, to, as best as possible, soften what will be a ground invasion. But Palestinians will die, just as more Israelis will die because of what Hamas did. Final point. How interesting, right? I think that very few people could answer that question, would answer that question. What would you do, knowing all of this, if you were Israel? How would you respond? It goes to show how tribal we are. It goes to show how much easier it is to just lash out from our perspective. But real world solutions. This is what Israel now has to face. Give Israel some advice. What would you do? Most of us are either afraid to answer that question or are so stuck in our political ways that we don't want to answer that question. Well, Israel's going to do what Israel has to do. And civilians will die. And that's really, really unfortunate. I'm Joe Walsh. This is White Flag with Joe Walsh. Thanks for listening. Be brave this week.
Thank you for listening. Remember to listen, share, and follow White Flag with Joe Walsh on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere great podcasts are found. And be sure to leave a 5-star review. This has been White Flag with Joe Walsh.